and welcome to Artwork, a conversation with creative people about the joys, the challenges, and the mundane moments of living an artistic life. We're your hosts. I'm Poppy Rose.
And I'm Brie Robertson.
And our artist today is Charlie Dupré.
Charlie is a playwright, actor, and spoken word artist from London. He has performed at festivals such as Latitude, In the Woods, and Secret Garden Party, was a 4-time Hammer and Tongue National Slam finalist and a BBC Slam finalist.
He has also taken multiple shows to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, including The Stories of Shakey P, which reimagined Shakespeare as a playground battle rapper, and Macblair, which told the story of Tony Blair as a Macbeth-style tragicomedy. It played the Brighton and Edinburgh Fringes to critical success and was one of the Scotsman's top 6 hot picks for political shows in 2017. Charlie tells us all about his experience taking his independent shows to these festivals and shares some tips of the things he's learnt along the way.
In the last couple of years, Charlie has moved away from pursuing an acting career to discovering a love of playwriting. In this episode, we talk about the importance of staying open to trying new things and how your path will reveal itself.
We also talk about Charlie's love of Shakespeare and reinventing his stories and plays with a current and topical twist. How theatre can be an amazing space to open discussion about politics and other important issues, especially in today's polarised climate. And we also get a special performance of some excerpts from his plays and some wonderful spoken word.
Let's dive in. Welcome, Charlie, to the Artwork Podcast. It's so nice to have you here today.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. The last time Charlie and I worked together, do you remember, Charlie, we were on that theatre project in a school, I forget where it was, in a really beautiful part of Berlin?
I do remember, it was in Köpenick.
Was it in Köpenick?
It's so beautiful there. I actually went there again recently to look at a house, and it's so lovely. Yeah.
Yes, and do you remember when we had the break in the afternoon on the last day and I was like, I'm really not feeling well. And we went in on the Friday afternoon, the kids performed their shows, and then I realised I had appendicitis.
Oh my goodness. God, yes, I do remember that.
And the next day I was in the hospital having an operation to get my appendix out.
Oh, Brie, yeah, that was that.
It was so wild.
That is mad. But your show was amazing. I remember being so impressed with your play.
Oh, thank you.
You just smashed it. It was so well directed, and yeah, you did all that with appendicitis.
Well, I just got the appendicitis at the end. I remember telling the sound guy lights up, lights down, and just being like, what am I doing? This is ridiculous.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Doubled over in pain.
Cool, what trauma.
But I'll never forget that project and that time we worked together, that's for sure. Before we jump into asking you lots of different questions, can you give us a really brief introduction about who you are, where you come from, and what you do? What's your creative thing?
Yeah, well, do you know what? It's quite complicated, Brie. So that's why maybe it's quite hard to ask about. I guess it depends if you mean right now or kind of historically. But I'll just start with saying I'm from London. My thing was always I want to be an actor. So I graduated uni, I went to drama school, became an actor. However, throughout the whole time basically, and particularly at uni, I'd always written a lot. And I'd really enjoyed writing. At uni, I actually became a drum and bass MC, believe it or not.
Wow.
And I spent lots of time writing drum and bass rap lyrics. That was kind of my thing at uni. Everyone was doing DJing, because drum and bass was the thing at the time. It was massive. It's not massive anymore, but it was massive then. Everyone was learning to DJ. And I guess it wasn't for me, kind of the technical, kind of quite mathematical side of DJing wasn't for me. I was always attracted to the guy standing on stage, or the girl sometimes standing on stage with the mic, hyping up the crowd and just gibbering lyrics like a machine gun for an hour. I was like, I want to be that guy. So I started writing drum bass lyrics and teaching myself to be a drum and bass MC. And then when I was sort of struggling as an actor, having left drama school, I was still writing these lyrics, and I started entering poetry slams and winning quite a lot of them. And I thought, oh, this is good. This is kind of a nice vibe because it allows me to still perform. A lot of it was quite characterized. So I was using my acting training as well.
Yeah.
And these then developed into full-length shows. I took some of these shows up to the Edinburgh Festival, and then a few other places as well. And then eventually these sort of solo shows became plays. To date, the plays I've written have all been for 4 people or less. And so I took 2 productions up to the Edinburgh Festival and then on a sort of little mini tour afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to where I am now. And then having done those 2 productions, I then enrolled on this mentorship scheme in the UK. I mean, I was living in Berlin at the time, but I did it in the UK. I've always been back in the UK a lot prior to the lockdown situation, of course. I was always going to and fro between London and Berlin. So I was doing this mentorship scheme for playwrights, and I had a mentor who was quite a well-established playwright. It was a whole program over the course of, it finished just last year, end of last year. He helped me basically write a new play, a part of which was then published in an anthology for all the mentees. And we had a showcase. It ended up being an online showcase, but it was supposed to initially have been in a theatre in London. And that's kind of where I'm at. So if you're asking me what I am now, I would say I'm a playwright. I write plays. I'm not just a playwright necessarily, but it's what I'm focusing on at the moment. I still maybe like occasionally write spoken word stuff, but it tends to increasingly be for like special occasions of friends and family. Like the last spoken word piece I think I wrote was for my friend when I was best man at his wedding. And for my own wedding, in fact, as well. So like, yeah, I guess the spoken word is like I'm moving away from it a little bit professionally, but I still, use all of it. I mean, it kind of all ties in, doesn't it? Because it's all like using words, using rhythm, using language, and it ties into my love of Shakespeare as well. I guess one of my goals at the moment is to write a monologue play that uses a lot of spoken word, but is still a play. And then eventually, like looking to the future, I'd love to move into screenwriting. I'm sort of inching towards planning to write a pilot episode of a TV series about Shakespeare, possibly, but that's still in a very kernel, is that a word? It's in just the seed of an idea still in my brain at the moment. Yeah,
that is amazing. So much. What a journey. So I would love to know, because I also studied theatre and loved the theatre, and I really distinctly remember when I first fell in love with it and kind of what an impact it made on me. So I was wondering if you remember when you first fell in love with theatre and what kind of impact did it make on you in that beginning time?
That's a really great question. So my mum would always take us as kids to a local children's theatre in Wimbledon, very posh area of South London, called the Polka Theatre. And they had plays for kids, but they were often quite sort of serious. Like I remember her taking us to see a play about Anne Frank. It was based on the diary of Anne Frank. And I just remember being just fascinated like with the play and the story and the people, the real life people. I've always been kind of really interested in plays about real life people. But also, I think it was just the atmosphere, the whole atmosphere of being in a theatre, this atmosphere that we're missing so much at the moment, of physically being in a theatre, the whole ritual, going to find your seat, getting your ice cream in the interval, getting your program. I would always get a program. I would insist on it, and I've still got them all. They're like stacked up somewhere in my parents' house. Getting the program and reading it from cover to cover. being fascinated with actors, like the whole concept that this is not the person that they're pretending to be. This is a different person with their own life, pretending to be this person in this story. And I would always be really interested in who the actors were, and also in films, I would always check the cast list and I don't know, remember the actor's name who'd played a particular part, and sometimes I would write to them. And sometimes they would write back. Often I'd write to them, even when they weren't particularly well known or famous or anything. I'd just be like, I really liked this actor in this play. And my dad worked at the BBC at the time, so he got me the copies of Spotlight, which is a huge actors directory. So I was able to find their kind of agent contact details and stuff. So it came. So I guess, and this was something we just did a lot as kids. I guess it's thanks to my parents taking us to the theatre a lot, and it was just a real kind of routine that I particularly loved. And then just following on from that was Shakespeare particularly, and that kind of happened when they ran this series of half-hour animated retellings of Shakespeare plays, animated for kids, short versions of the most famous of Shakespeare's plays on TV. And my dad recorded all of them and then brought me the accompanying books, which contained all of the scripts and just a little picture book. And I have these books here with me in Berlin today. This was when I was 11 years old. Wow. But I've got all the books and I use them in workshops when I teach Shakespeare still, because they're such great books. But I just really fell in love with, I think it was Richard III was my first one that I really kind of got on board with. I was like, I love this character, Richard III, and just the idea that the hero is also the villain, just made me kind of excited, basically. And kind of, I think just the kind of Machiavellian aspect of that story just really compelled me. And then I think A Midsummer Night's Dream was the other one that I think it was those two, and I kind of saw immediately, okay, so Shakespeare does these kind of dark characters, but he also does these light comedies with people falling in love with donkeys and fairies and things. So that's where my Shakespeare journey began.
I just thought it would be interesting to start with asking you about what you think theatre has the power to do in the world for us as humans, or what draws you to theatre as an art form that you feel passionate to work in? Do you do it purely for fun, or do you feel like there is a greater purpose that theatre can offer us as humans?
There is absolutely a greater purpose, I think, yes. I mean, theatre is definitely fun, but I think that fun can be harnessed for very particular goals. I always think that every play should be funny. Every play, no matter how dark or serious or intense, should also be funny, because humor is kind of just what lets us in to the seriousness of a topic. It kind of is the entrance for a lot of people, and I think you immediately get people on board if you can make them laugh, because I guess what is making people laugh, it's showing them something that they connect to, showing them a character's own vulnerability, and in seeing a character be vulnerable in a way that maybe an audience member might have felt vulnerable themselves, can induce that response of laughter, but it also lets people into the kind of humanity of the characters. So to answer your question, I think theatre really does have the power to change things. I think you can explore things in theatre that do not get explored in normal discourse, in normal conversations that you might have. There are things you might be afraid to say, opinions you might be afraid to explore. And in theatre, it gives you the freedom. You can do that. You can just go right in, and you can have those conversations with yourself through your characters. And that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, there should be no clear answers in theatre. It shouldn't be kind of beating the audience over the head with a solution or even an answer. It's all about posing questions, setting up different questions, and kind of illuminating the complexity of everything. You know, because I think a lot of the time, particularly on social media, things are simplified so much. Like viewpoints, stances are just simplified, and like nothing is simple. I read people's tweets and stuff, angry tweets often, and I'm like, it's just not that simple, is it? It's like it's way more complicated than that. There are so many factors at play and nuances at play in any given situation. You know, you see so many people these, you know, at the moment getting kind of beaten down on social media for one kind of slightly callous comment. Like the other day, it was a casting director who'd said that he was sort of like having a go at actors who didn't learn their lines for auditions. It's like, yeah, it's maybe a bit harsh, particularly in the current situation, but you know, he just got absolutely piled on top of for an entire day, and now I think he's left Twitter, and it's just like it's completely out of proportion. You know, it's completely out of proportion. And I think what I love about theatre is it avoids that. It gives you the space to explore and to ask questions and to kind of really just get involved with the difficulty of everything, the complexity and the unanswerability of the questions that we all face on a day-to-day basis.
And that's so important right now when you're so right. Like, I've never really thought about it that way, but it's so important that we have those spaces. So you have, you've created a couple of performances. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I think it fits where the conversation's going. But you've created a couple of performances about UK leaders. Is that what you were trying to achieve in those performances? Were you trying to start a conversation about the leadership and the decisions that were being made by these leaders?
Right. Yeah. So I'll just talk about the first one, if I may.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Because I'll talk about Tony Blair. Right. Feel free, anyone who wants to switch off at this point if that is a too unsavory a proposition. But basically, Tony Blair is a really great example of why I write. So I'll just explain that a little bit. When I was 12, I met Tony Blair during his campaign for during the general election, 1997, the one that he won and with a huge landslide became Prime Minister. I met him because my dad, as I mentioned, worked at the BBC. I went and watched him being interviewed on a programme, and I asked him a question afterwards. He was answering my question, and we were photographed together and put on the front page of The Independent, which is one of the British newspapers.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was huge. And so he was my absolute hero at the time in 1997. He was many people's heroes then. He just represented this kind of massive wave of optimism and kind of like salvation almost, you know. And you can sort of see how this enacted on him in a toxic way, this kind of feeling, this elevation to almost godlike status in those early years of his prime ministership. You know, you can sort of see how that influenced some of his later questionable decisions. So fast forward to much later. I was much older, and let's fast forward all the way to 2016 when the Chilcot inquiry came out, damning him for his decision to invade Iraq. And ever since then, you look today at like the absolute carnage that is going on in Iraq. There was a fantastic BBC documentary called Once Upon a Time in Iraq, which really, brings it home, the scale of suffering that has been caused. And knowing that Tony Blair brought about that situation, it's like, how does the man sleep at night, knowing what is still going on in Iraq? All the suffering that decision caused, together with the decisions of the United States. And yet, during the carnage of like the Brexit chaos of 2 years ago, particularly, Tony Blair would like pop his head up and say something that made more sense than anyone had made in politics for months. And so it brings it home that like, and with all characters, with every character that you should write as a writer, there's more than one version of who they are, and Blair kind of really exemplifies that, because there's Blair the warmonger, there's Blair the duplicitous, overreacher, and then there's the Blair that speaks with a lot of clarity about current issues, and then additional to that is my own conflicted feelings towards him over time. Being on the front page of The Independent with him, hero worshipping him, to then sort of gradually accepting later on that I had to hate him. And that was quite a difficult leap to make. I mean, but I made that journey, but it was a journey to go on in my kind of connection with him. So it kind of exemplifies a lot about why I write. And it was the release of the Chilcot Inquiry in 2016 that kind of was the catalyst for my thinking, I've got to explore these conflicted feelings I have. And also I was very much attracted by the complexity of the situation as I saw it, to explore it by writing a play about it. So it wasn't really like I woke up in 2016, it was like, I'm going to be a playwright now. It was like I wanted to write about Tony Blair. And I wanted to write about him through the frame of a Shakespeare play, Macbeth, because the more I thought about it, the more he was exactly like Macbeth, a hero at the beginning, almost too revered, had everything. The only way is down, really. And that's what happens to Macbeth. He gets corrupted, seduced by this idea of being even greater, having even more than he already has. And that kind of is the means by which he then commits this sort of slow spiritual suicide over the course of the play. And it's exactly how I see Tony Blair, as having gradually sold his soul. And now he's just this kind of husk of a man that desperately wants to have his, quite sensible opinions listened to, but nobody will, of course, because, the damage he has done to himself and to the world through Iraq is irreversible. So, yeah, that was kind of what made me realize. So I wrote the play and got together a small group, and we took it to Brighton Fringe and Edinburgh Fringe, and it went really well. I played him myself, so I was able to kind of give myself another acting role. It was a great experience all round. Like, we got great reviews. It went on to King's Head in London and various other places around the UK. It was just a really nice time. It was just a really nice company that we had. It was just a very small company, but yeah, it was just a really sort of a good experience, and it kind of felt like it kind of redefined what I was doing. Where I was sort of taking my writing journey, I guess.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, you're using this theatre to invoke to explore your feelings and to invoke a discussion between the audience and with each other and themselves and with you as well. Like, what was the personal response from this play? Like, did you have conversations with audience members afterwards? And how were your feelings after working them through this play and performing it and sharing it and getting feedback?
It definitely provoked a lot of discussion. Yeah, I had someone write a really nice message saying, we saw your play, and then we were talking about it all the way home. Like, I mean, as in they were arguing about it all the way home. And I thought, that's exactly the response I want. I want people to argue about it. I'm not offering a solution. I'm highlighting the range of interpretation and the unsolvability of this story in a way. I guess I wanted to write it because I refused to accept that it's as simple as he is evil, he's a warlock. I just refuse to accept the simplicity of that. And so I think I think people responded to that in that it gave them an opportunity to kind of dig into it a bit. I don't think it stopped people from hating Tony Blair. That wasn't my intention. It wasn't kind to him. It was kind of, any more than Macbeth is kind to Macbeth. But it was definitely, it kind of, I think what I wanted to highlight was that he convinced himself he was doing the right thing. And that's how he sleeps at night now. Because he has created this narrative for himself where he was doing the right thing. And I think it just shows anyone can create a narrative for themselves where they are doing the right thing. Whoever they are, whatever it is they're doing, however heinous the acts that they're committing are. And that is what we need to understand. That is where we need empathy to build bridges and to steer people away from doing heinous things, not by telling them they're evil, because that just puts up further barriers and causes further division. So yeah, that was, I guess, kind of my intention with the play. And then there was there was some feedback that along the lines of I had a couple of meetings with some theatres afterwards, and one literary manager suggested she would have liked it to have been more developed at the end, sort of like going into the future. What does this mean for us now in 2018, as it was at the time, 2017? It's like, what does this mean for us now? What's the takeaway here? What does this mean for our world today? Which I think I had touched upon at the end of the play with a bit about Brexit and stuff, but it was maybe a bit undercooked. So it made me realize, I need to go further with these. It's not enough just to tell a story of, like fairly recent political history. You need to take that further. Like, why now? And I sent it to Radio 4, which is like the main producer of audio drama in the UK, and their feedback was much the same. Just like, well, this is great, but why now? Why do we need this story now? So yeah, and that I guess was a learning curve for me, because I was like, okay, I need to interrogate why I'm telling certain stories for now, for the current context, and to kind of really think, to really tap into what do people need to hear now. Yeah, like I said, the play was based within the framework of Macbeth. And so I basically took some of the soliloquies from Macbeth and in a way that I hope Shakespeare would have approved of, I butchered them to be about Tony Blair and not about Macbeth. So I'll just read one for you, which is basically, so everyone maybe you know the speech by Macbeth that begins, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" When he's having a hallucination of a dagger, and that's right before he goes off and he commits his first big crime, the murder of the king. So I thought, well, what was Tony Blair's like murder of King Duncan, and also what was his weapon? And so I thought, well, the moment at which Tony Blair committed his crime was probably the speech he gave to Parliament when he passed the motion to invade Iraq. And his weapon with which he committed that crime was his rhetoric, his skill at oration, his skill with words, basically. So I rewrote the speech to sort of be about that. So I'll give you a little rendition now. Is this an audience which I see before me, hanging upon my words? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to hearing as to sight? I see thee still. And now will weave a tapestry of purpose in your ears to smother up your doubt, This natural evolution of my world-mending mission is to grow into a leader, and a leader's definition is to bear omnisciently on the buttons of decision and convince with tools of rhetoric to generate what's best for all. Our future's nigh, no lie in sight. There's only truth in doing what is justified and right. It's chronicled in stone, it will be so. Let me tell the house what I know.
I didn't realize that the situation kind of pulled you to just need to write something, and then this whole other door opened up for you. What was it like performing something that you had written as opposed to auditioning for something and acting another person's writing and another person's story? And did that really change the course of your career long term, do you think? Did you kind of realize, like, right, I don't think I want to go back to just acting?
I think it made me realize that I was acting for the wrong reasons
Right.
before. I think when I was acting in my own play, I was still primarily the playwright.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me realize that when I was an actor, I didn't have enough respect for the material that I was serving. You know, I didn't see the actor as serving the playwright or the play, which is sounds so stupid now, but like I really didn't. You know, I kind of was in it to perform, you know, to be seen, and so I would say to anyone acting today or wanting to act, you know, it's all about the material. You're acting in a play. You know, we would do Chekhov at drama school, and like I sort of would read it, but I wouldn't read it with much kind of like attention. I would read it because I had to. I didn't have the right kind of reverence for the material. I think my earlier love of like plays and theatre somehow got lost a bit. I became far too obsessed with being the performer, and I think that way is not, if that's the way that you feel about your acting, then you're in it for the wrong reasons. And I think I learned that eventually. So and now, you know, I'm fascinated with plays, and I'm just like, I love reading them, taking them apart, looking at what the playwright's doing with the form, with the structure, with the characters, and I take so much joy from that now. And I'm like, why wasn't I that? It's not like I wasn't interested at drama school in it, but not nearly to the same level as now. My focus wasn't on that somehow, which sounds ridiculous. And that is why ultimately acting wasn't where I ended up, you know, placing my main emphasis. So
yeah. I think it's quite common, because I remember when I was at theatre school, and I remember being told, like, or reading Grotowski or something, and learning like the actor is the servant, the actor is serving. And I remember reading that being like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah,
I'm the star.
yeah, exactly.
And it took me a while to grasp that, because I think especially when you're young and you're like, you're in the musicals and you're the star of the show, it's really easy to forget that you're actually serving the audience, and you're serving the playwright, you're serving the director by like helping deliver a story. And as you say, like provide this space for conversation to happen. And I feel like acting has become something in our society that has been really misunderstood.
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's a very seductive profession, acting. You know, loads of people want to be actors, and you know, you see people on the TV, and you're like, oh, I want to be them. I want to be doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of, I don't know, it just. But I was always a writer before I was, and I wrote stuff as a kid. You know, I was always into writing stories. I loved English at school, and then it was only later that I kind of I don't know, with my growth into sort of, you know, advanced teenagehood, I don't know, my ego got carried away, and I was like, suddenly I want to be a star. I want to be like a movie star. And yeah, it's just the wrong reason to go into anything, you know. And yeah, it took me a while to figure that out, but I think I'm happy to say that I think I have now.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your love of Shakespeare. Your first full-length show was called The Stories of Shakey P, and it imagined Shakespeare as a rapper. What relevance do you feel that Shakespeare has for us today? And how has Shakespeare kind of given you, it seems like with the show that you made about Tony Blair, that Shakespeare kind of gave you a beginning step to create your own work. What do you feel that Shakespeare can offer us as a society now? I feel like a lot of people have the argument that, you know, it's outdated. Shakespeare still takes up too many seats in theatres. We need to give new playwrights the opportunity. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective of like why should Shakespeare still be, oh my gosh, there's so many SHs. Why should Shakespeare still have a place in our in the theatre in today's world? What do you think he offers us?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we should definitely be asking right now. Because yeah, why do we constantly just mindlessly repeat the same plays over and over and over again? Why do we do that? Why this writer? It's a great question, and we absolutely should like be interrogating that right now. You know, I feel like now we're at this kind of, it kind of feels like we're at this exciting kind of cusp of something, of a new world. I don't know, of a new direction, a new chapter. Anyway, in history, maybe it's like the coronavirus kind of resetting everything. Maybe it's the recent presidential election. I don't know, but it feels like, yeah, we're reassessing everything right now. We're reassessing kind of what we stand for as societies. So we need to ask, yeah, what is Shakespeare's place in that? Does he have a place in that? And you know, I'm asking myself this every day. You know, I said at the beginning, I want to write a TV thing about Shakespeare. I'm trying to work out my angle because I don't have one at the moment. You know, I'm just like, why write a TV thing about Shakespeare? I mean, there's definitely undeniable that Shakespeare of his time was by far and away had by far and away the most penetrating insight than any of his contemporaries, not only like into human nature but also into how that related to his own socio-political context. You know, if you look at all of his plays, they're very much related to what was going on politically at the time when he wrote them. And that is fascinating to explore because you can really see how clever he was being by writing Macbeth, let's say. He was making a political comment. Even in something like A Midsummer Night's Dream, he weaves in the Queen, and like there had been a lot of attempts to dethrone the Queen at the sort of time he was writing. And it's all kind of like weaved in. Julius Caesar as well is a direct response to the Earl of Essex's rebellion against Queen Elizabeth I that had just happened. So we have to sort of ask ourselves, okay, that was great. He wrote for his time, exactly like a playwright should. But why now? What does he have to say to us now? I mean, if you take a play like Hamlet, you know, one of the most popular and, you know, arguably the richest, it raises like crucial questions about, you know, life and death, about, you know, what we're sort of doing here on this planet, about fate. But it also marked a big moment in terms of like, you know, how to right character, because no one up until Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, had really done it in quite the same way, where you have the protagonist and the antagonist in one person. Right? That's what you've got with Hamlet. That's why Hamlet's so fascinating, because it's a battle with himself the whole way through. He didn't write the story. The story existed. It was a kind of a classic revenge tragedy, but he made it interesting because he stretched it out. It's like, okay, his uncle's killed his dad. He's going to take revenge, right? That was the story initially. He was like, hang on, what can he do to delay that act of revenge, which basically is the bulk of the play. So it was really good, groundbreaking in terms of writing character, to have that kind of opaqueness to Hamlet's character. Like, what is really going on with Hamlet? It's so unclear. I mean, it's so fascinating to explore. There are all these hints. He gives just enough hints, but it's so much meat for an actor or director to play with. So yeah, obviously we're not going to stop doing Hamlet, because it's great. But I think new productions need to be like, how can they repackage it to make it about now? Like, I think at the moment there's the National Theatre in the UK have just released a production of Romeo and Juliet, starring, which is sort of made for screen, a film basically, made by the National Theatre, who obviously normally do plays, but these must. And it's starring Josh O'Connor, who plays Prince Charles in The Crown. He's playing Romeo, and I haven't actually seen it yet, but from what I gather, it's brilliant, because it really seizes on our cultural and political moment, which is characterized by division. I mean, I'm talking specifically about the UK here, but it has a comment for Europe and the world in general as well. Romeo and Juliet is about division. It's about warring factions, and what could be more prescient than that now, where particularly in the UK, the left and the right are being pushed further and further apart. There's got Brexit brought about untold division. It's the same in the US. There's this battle for the cultural soul of the UK going on, with people, woke versus anti-woke culture. That is Romeo and Juliet. That's the backdrop of Romeo and Juliet, is like division, hatred, and the crossing, and love kind of crossing that divide, love conquering that division. So in that case, I would say that the producers of that production they've found a way to make Romeo and Juliet important, not only relevant but important for us today. So I think that's the challenge for people doing Shakespeare now.
Can I just say, I wish you were my English teacher when I was doing my GCSEs. I mean, you make Shakespeare sound so exciting and interesting, and my memory of it in school was it just this boring, like, just got to get it done for the exam. But I'm just really enjoying listening to the way that you speak about it, and it makes it seem so interesting and exciting again for me. And just thanks for that.
Oh, great. Well, because it is.
I remember learning when I went to drama school that because I guess a lot of people's idea of Shakespeare now is very like formal. You go to the theatre and you sit down and you watch something, and it's all very like neatly packaged and like very upper class theatre and all that kind of stuff. But I remember, and I think that part of that makes it quite inaccessible for a lot of people nowadays, depending on how it's being staged and who's directing it and everything. But I remember having that in my mind as I was learning or reading The Merchant of Venice or Romeo and Juliet in school, and just being like, it's so proper. And then I went to drama school, and I remember my tutor being like, no, God, when Shakespeare was playing, it would have been outside. People would have been throwing food. It was completely like wild and crazy and caused discussion and caused outrage. And I remember just that moment, like completely reframing how Shakespeare would have originally been for the audience and for the actors, and the vision of what the plays the vision that he would have had for how the plays would be presented. And I feel like that's part of where the magic is lost now. How do you feel Shakespeare would feel now, seeing a lot of the performances?
Okay, yeah. So I think Shakespeare would, like a lot of the productions that are happening now, as you said, in his day, they were like intense, immersive, people throwing vegetables at the clowns on stage. They had that raucous energy, and I think that is really important to try and achieve in a production of Shakespeare. I'm thinking of a production that happened of A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Bridge Theatre a couple of years ago, which really did a great job of capturing that immersive energy, because it kind of put all the action in amongst the audience members. And different parts of the stage would keep popping up in different places, and the audience were all standing up as the groundlings would have been in Shakespeare's day. And then sometimes the actors would say things directly to the audience, and there would be this sort of just this sense of banter, this sense of inclusion, not this kind of traditional prosarch kind of here's the stage and here's the audience separation that we see a lot of today. So I think that particular production did a really great job of capturing that energy, which obviously you also don't get that from looking at it in a stuffy classroom with a stuffy English teacher. Another thing which that production did brilliantly, which was really inspired, was it reversed the roles of Oberon and Titania. So I don't know if our listeners know Midsummer Night's Dream, but Oberon is the king of the fairies, Titania is the queen of the fairies. And Oberon, over the course of the play, basically he wants to steal Titania's small Indian boy that she is looking after to be his servant. So already hugely problematic. Gets even more problematic when he basically plays a really horrible trick on Titania, puts a poisoned flower, the juice of a poisoned flower, in her eye to make her fall in love with a man with the head of a donkey so he can steal said Indian boy. And then at the end of the play, they just sort of like kiss and make up, and that's all fine. So obviously, like, this kind of thing in a Shakespeare play is problematic for us now, because it's just incredibly toxic patriarchal behavior from Oberon and also from other characters in the play as well. And this needs to be addressed in a modern production. So when this production did this role swapping of Oberon and Titania, it gave the character of Titania this agency and this power that we don't normally see in representations of that story. And I think Shakespeare would have approved of that, because what Shakespeare was the master of was having his finger on the pulse. And that production showed that, while capturing that raucous energy in the way they laid the stage and the audience, how they kind of mixed them together, they also are able to respond to the kind of, the progressive culture of gender politics that we are moving hopefully towards, definitely in the UK. So I think Shakespeare would approve of reinventing his work in such ways, because that was, after all, exactly what he did. He would take up existing plays, he would improve them, he would make them fit his audience. That's what he did with so many plays. Like, hardly any of his plays are original. He didn't think of any of those stories. So he would absolutely approve of people rehashing his ideas to make them fit our culture today.
Oh, goodness. I didn't realize that they weren't necessarily original stories, and it makes so much sense now. It's almost like the stories are the things that are the most precious thing, and these stories are like frames that we can use to help us tell relevant stories for our time, which is what you've done with the Tony Macblair show, and yeah, it's amazing. It's like these
That's such a
stories are
good-
little golden nuggets that we can twist and turn and challenge our society, whatever time we're living in.
That's such a good analogy of the stories being the frame of, and then, you know, the current time being the picture and the inside. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it, Brie.
You have started an Instagram page called Berlin Shakespeare Workshop, and you've been posting some readings from the Bible of Shakespeare. I wondered if you had a reading today that you could share with us.
So I love the play. So this is from Henry IV, Part 1, right? And I love the character of Prince Hal, who is like the son of Henry, the King Henry IV, who goes on to become the heroic Henry V. But in this play, in Henry IV, he's a kind of like wayward prince who kind of hangs out with his cronies in the pub the whole time. And at the end of the first act, he has a soliloquy to the audience where he explains to the audience that this is all an act. He's doing this deliberately so that when he reveals himself to be, you know, the kind of responsible, inspiring, heroic prince that he eventually turns out to be, it's all the more the effect is all the more wonderful, and also because by hanging out with these lowlifes in the pub and living a kind of raggedy life of debauchery, he's actually educating himself. And I think I just really love the speech which he gives that describes this. But also it tells us quite a lot about Shakespeare, I think, because Shakespeare sort of did that as well. He hung out in the pub, in bars, with this kind of gang of other writers, but he himself did not indulge in, you know, all the debauchery that they would have done. And as a result, he was able to kind of like, you know, exceed them in his output. And he was sort of doing so to educate himself. It kind of has this kind of quality of, don't worry, I've got this. There's a plan, and just you wait. You know, I will reveal who I really am. And I guess I really love the kind of the sense of patience about his destiny. He's like, this is not, you know, I'll get there. Prince Hal, Act 1, Scene 2 of Henry IV, Part 1, by William Shakespeare. I know you all, and will awhile uphold the unyoked humour of your idleness. Yet herein will I imitate the sun, who doth permit the base contagious clouds to smother up his beauty from the world, that when he please again to be himself, being wanted, he may be more wondered at by breaking through the foul and ugly mists of vapours that did seem to strangle him. If all the year were playing holidays, to sport would be as tedious as to work, but when they seldom come, they wished for come, and nothing pleaseth but rare accidents. So when this loose behaviour I throw off, and pay the debt I never promised, by how much better than my word I am, by so much shall I falsify men's hopes, and like bright metal on a sullen ground, my reformation, glittering o'er my fault, shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which hath no foil to set it off. I'll so offend to make offence a skill, redeeming time when men think least I will.
I would love to ask you a little bit now about taking your shows to festivals. I think, especially coming from Australia, bringing your show to a festival in the UK, especially Edinburgh Fringe, is like the goal. It's something that can be a really, really great opportunity to get your work out there and people to see it. And I wondered what the experience has been like for you to take your shows to festivals, and if you have any advice for independent theatre makers who might be trying to get into that world.
Well, Edinburgh is kind of the pilgrimage that every artist, I think, needs to make at some point. It's kind of unparalleled. I mean, in Australia, there's the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, which is also huge, and there's also the Adelaide Fringe as well, and there's one in New York. But yeah, Edinburgh is like the biggest, I think, and it attracts people from all over the world, and it's just an amazing place to be for a month. There's just so much going on, and you're just going out there, you're doing your show every day, you're selling your show, and you just feel like you're living your artist life in the, like, kind of the purest sense. There's nothing between you and you doing your thing, and you have the potential to get a lot back from it. You know, you can get you get your work reviewed. Not always a great thing, of course, but even bad reviews can be really useful. You have the opportunity to showcase your work to industry professionals. Edinburgh is swarming with producers and agents and things. And so many of, you know, successful comedians, for example, have been discovered. In fact, most successful comedians in the UK, at least, have started out at Edinburgh. So I'd say definitely go to Edinburgh. Having said that, it's a mission. It's a complete mission. It's not easy, very expensive. It's very soul destroying sometimes. It's very hard work, and it's not always enjoyable. I would say most people who have success in Edinburgh have gone to Edinburgh year after year after year for several years. Because every time you go, you learn. You come back battered and bruised from the experience sometimes, but you've learned. You feel even that's a win, because you then can recalibrate. You know what works and what didn't work in terms of what you were doing. You know what worked and what didn't work in terms of how you marketed it, the decisions that you made in terms of venue, who you collaborated with, whether you employed someone to handle your press, whether you did it yourself, how much you flyered, you know, whether you invested in big billboards. You know, you learn about all that side. And sadly, you do have to kind of be your own producer, at least in the beginning. You have to kind of take care of all of that. And I kind of basically learned the job of a producer. Like I never really want to be a producer, but I guess I've had to do it. And I produced both of the two plays that I took up there. And the production side does take a lot of time and effort, and it's time that now I would much rather spend just writing. So I think moving forward now, I'm going to try and avoid doing that job again myself. But in the beginning, you do need to do it. I would say if you're a first timer taking a show to Edinburgh, or well, actually just to Edinburgh, do the free fringe. The free fringe is a great thing, because the free fringe is the one I do is called, there are several. The one I have always done is PBH's free fringe. And it's a way of taking a shot there very low on cost, because you don't have to pay for the venue. It's free, and your show is free, although you do ask for donations at the end of the show. And if you do it right, you can actually make quite a lot of money through those donations. I've seen shows be massive hits on the free fringe. Every day, the performer is making an absolute bucket load of cash, and it feels kind of nice, because every day you end your show with physical, tangible cash in your hand that you can then go and spend and be like, I just earned this. And it's like, it's not an experience you often have as an artist. Like if you are getting paid, you might get it transferred somewhere way down the line, but it's just nice to like literally be going out there like a busker and earning your wares, you know, selling your wares and earning your mead, as it were. So yeah, so and some of my best experiences in Edinburgh with my solo shows were on the free fringe. It just feels like a lot more of an accessible way to do it. If you're doing the paid fringe, which I did when I did when I did Macblair, We did the paid Fringe. It's a big financial risk. You have to stump up a lot of some money in the beginning. And with Macblair, what we did with Macblair was we took it to Brighton Fringe first. Now, I would also massively recommend Brighton Fringe as a first port of call, because it's not nearly as expensive, it's not nearly as difficult to crack as Edinburgh. I've always found Brighton Fringe a very pleasant experience, and always come away relatively happy with how it went. And then with Macblair, we did Brighton Fringe. It went really well. And then we kind of, off the back of Brighton Fringe, we went to Edinburgh. But Brighton Fringe kind of gave us that crucial support that kind of, as in we got some reviews at Brighton Fringe, we got some money from Brighton Fringe that then paved the way for taking the show to Edinburgh. So that was kind of one way of doing it. That seemed to work for us. I think also with Macblair, it was really useful that we had a show with a really clear and marketable concept, that we could say in just a very small number of words. It's the story of Tony Blair told like Macbeth. That's literally what it is. And people, I think with Edinburgh, you're fighting against so many shows that if your concept can just cut through and instantly make sense in someone's brain, they're more likely to see it. They get what the show is then. And then they'll be like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I'll buy a ticket for that, rather than millions of other concepts that take them that little bit longer to wrap their head around, what is this actually about? Is it going to be good or not? If they have to think about it, then they're not gonna do the work to think about it. They're going to move to something that's clear and easy to comprehend. So I'd say that was an important thing with Edinburgh. But yeah, you learn by just doing it. I think making mistakes. I've had some terrible years. My first year was the free Fringe and it with Shakey P, and it went really well. I had a great time. So then I thought, well, logical next step, do Shakey P on the paid Fringe. Disaster. My worst year in Edinburgh by far. It didn't work on the paid Fringe. I tried to kind of add kind of music and stuff. I tried to kind of pimp it up a bit. Didn't work. It undermined what the show was initially about. It was also really hard to market. We were playing to tiny crowds every day. But we had to do it for the whole month. It was basically, but that experience was a crucial learning curve. Whenever I go to Edinburgh now, I'm like, okay, how to make it as not like that as possible is always my kind of mantra. And thankfully it hasn't ever been as bad as that again.
Wow, that's amazing. I think all of that is just such useful information to hear. And it's funny, isn't it, like when you feel like, I've made it to this point, I need to take the next step, and this show made it to that point, but I need to amp it up a little bit, and saying that you tried to pimp up your show a little bit, but sometimes it really ruins a show to add those extra elements, and I've experienced that too. Taking a show to a festival, and we were like, oh my goodness, lights, oh my goodness, like staging, and then we realized halfway through the tech that we were like, this is ruining it. No, we need to just go back to house lights, everyone on the floor. No, we cannot ruin this show by getting excited about all the possibilities. And it's really big lessons to learn.
If it worked the first time, don't mess with it. There's a reason why it worked. And I've done that. I did another show about philosophy, which I did it 2 times. And the second time I tried to make it better. But I'm not convinced it was better. In fact, I think it was better the first time.
Yeah, that good old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Absolutely. And sometimes the way things come out first time round is the truest, purest expression of what you wanted to say.
You have been in the theatre industry for quite a long time now, and I would say that that's a really massive achievement, because it's not an easy industry to build a life in, and it's really exciting to see people make it work for them, and to have these experiences, like taking their performances to festivals, getting great reviews, winning awards and things like that. And I wondered if you've got any any lessons that you've learned along the way that has helped you keep going when there's been challenges, and maybe what some of those challenges have been over the years working in this industry. How have you kept going?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you say I've been in the theatre industry for a long time, but it really doesn't feel like that. Actually, I actually consider myself an early career playwright, and that's because I guess with when I started writing plays, the dial sort of shifted in terms of what I was doing. You know, I spent a good few years pursuing acting. The spoken word side of things was a real thing, but I think when I wrote that first play, I had that realization of, you know, actually this is how I can best harness my passions and my abilities. That was a kind of a new start. I mean, not a new start, but a realignment for me. And even from there, it took me quite a long time to find my groove, because Macblair came out of, you know, an urge to talk about a particular thing. But then the follow up to that, which you mentioned earlier, which was Boris Rex, about the current UK Prime Minister, was a sort of, it was meant as a kind of sequel to it, but again, it wasn't, you know, it was a bit like that second album syndrome that kind of we were referring to. It didn't feel as true to me somehow. And also I kind of worked out that I needed to work on my craft of writing for theatre, you know, because it wasn't something I'd done that much of before. So really it was a whole new beginning, that. And the mentorship scheme that I mentioned I did was kind of almost like going back to school, you know, retraining almost as a playwright. And then I only graduated from that at the end of last year. So it feels like I'm an early career playwright to me. But what I would say is that's fine. You know, you don't have to know what you're doing like straight away. While your career might be going in the same general direction, it veers from side to side. You know, it veers into acting, into spoken word, into rapping, into this, into that. You know, it takes a while to find its groove sometimes, and that's definitely been the case with me. I think I would pinpoint the point at which I feel like I found my groove as only like early last year, because two things happened. First of all, I gave up drinking alcohol completely, and second of all, it was coronavirus, lockdown, all that. And these two things together enabled me to find a real level of consistency in my practice that I'd never really had before. Like I said, with like the plays that I was taking to Edinburgh, so much of my time was spent with the production. I wasn't actually writing that much. But with so I'm not saying people have to either give up alcohol or spend their life living in lockdown in order to achieve this. But these two things, like just the clear head that not drinking gave me, as well as the time that lockdown gave me, meant I really nailed my writing ritual, my routine. Not only my writing, but also my reading, my watching, my intake of material, because it's all part of it. You know, the actual physical writing is actually quite a small part of it. It's all about like listening to the world, you know, and looking at what other people are doing, learning, going to workshops. And the great thing about lockdown was so much was happening online. I felt suddenly really connected with the whole UK theatre industry. I'm doing at the moment I'm attending weekly workshops with well-established playwrights, and I'm constantly learning, and it's great. I feel like I'm in a groove. I'm like, I've found my thing that I'm really kind of like backing. I've found the horse that I'm really backing. You know, I'm really putting my money on this now, and it's going in a direction. It's probably still going to career loads, but you know, it's going in a direction. So I would just say, first of all, it's not about you, which is the lesson that I learned. Well, eventually learned was the lesson I should have learned when I was an actor. It's not about you, it's about the material. But also you need consistency in your approach, in your practice. You need to develop a routine. Just do it. It doesn't even need to be like a really extensive routine. I write for 2 hours every morning, 8 a.m. till 10 a.m. Then I have breakfast. That's it.
Wow.
Like that's my routine, and it works for me. Sometimes I don't write anything very much or anything very good, but it's a routine. And over time, it's like putting the bricks in place. Eventually you'll get a house, ideally. I'm working on 2 projects now in Berlin. My first project's actually in Berlin, which seems weird given that I've been here for like 4 years now. But yes, I'm working with Platypus Theatre on a show which hopefully will be premiered in October. It's for young people, and it's about communication and social media and the way that has affected young people's lives, particularly in recent times with the whole lockdown situation. And working with a fantastic director, Rebecca Scott, who has also done some Interact projects. On that, we're working in collaboration. I'm writing it at the moment. We've got some fantastic actors as well, including, I believe, one of your previous podcast guests, a gentleman by the name of Joshua Spriggs.
Yes, indeed.
Cool.
And a fantastic actress called Adrian Blunt as well. And so, I'm writing it, and we're doing a development week in June, and rehearsals are scheduled for August. So, and it's going to be called I Talk is the name of that show. So look out for that. And then Becca and I are also working on another show with her company, Monstrous Mess, as well. But more of that anon.
Let's hear a poem that you've written, and then it will be nearly time to say goodbye.
Okay, so this was part of a show I did about philosophy. And basically in the show, there's sort of 2 bits to it basically, and I'm going to do the second bit. So you'll see the inspiration from the Eminem song Stan. I think one of the things I loved about Stan is the fact that the whole thing is also letters. That's the form that he uses, is like it's just all letters, fan mail. So I wanted to sort of use that form for something basically. So in the show, in an earlier part of the show, my character writes a letter to reality, just saying like, what's going on, reality, man? It's all so confusing. Nothing's real. Everybody's lying. You don't know who to trust, and my head's going to explode. And he sends the letter off to reality, and then later in the show, he receives this letter back. Dear Charlie, reality's been busy recently, but she asked me to get back to you. She's sorry that you feel that without her you're that confused. She says, yes, life's a tricky one, especially as a human, because your minds are such fizzy things that many people fuse them. Just remember, Charlie, you're a part of nature. You're a finger of the energy that harnesses creation. You embody this world's spirit, and of this you can be sure. You're made of the same stuff as little fish and angry boars, and Neptune's soil and asteroids and mist and natural laws. We've all been spat out by a single twitch back at the source. Yes, being's kind of hyper. You have to improvise your life, like being tossed around a whirlpool. It isn't always nice, but remember that the currents aren't your enemies. In fact, they are your family. So dance with them. Eventually, you'll merge back with them happily. And don't obsess about reality. You don't need her like you think. She sends her love, but actually, she really can't commit. She's just too flighty, see. But hey, I didn't introduce myself. I'm change, and you can rely on me. I'll be a more faithful companion than any that you can only find in dreams. And that's because things decay into atoms that go riding free undefinably until they reform. But these forms don't live timelessly. And abstract ones such as truth, well, they're just what the mind believes. And that's why reality's elusive. She's never around. I keep begging her, freshen up, flesh out the ground, and start meddling less with the guesswork of clowns, but there's no telling her what to do. She just gets in her flounce. So don't overanalyze. Some dreaming's a given, son. And don't fret about meaning, because frequently there isn't one. If you don't feel better straight away, you will. It's just a phase. And they don't last. I know these things. I'm change. And I'm here to stay. That is a pledge that I won't break. So let's chat again soon, Charlie. I'm never far away. Peace.
Oh, I love that. So good. So good. It's so nice to finally hear some of your work, Charlie.
Oh, well,
my
thank
gosh.
you for giving me the opportunity to share it.
Oh, it's just awesome. I'm so excited to see where your journey's going to continue now that you're on the road of playwriting and you've got your discipline and you've got the vision, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
See, eh?
We usually finish the podcast with a question of, do you have any advice for other artists? You kind of answered it a bit before with when I asked you about longevity in the theatre industry.
Yeah.
But is there any other advice that you have kind of learned to hold on to as an artist that you think you would like to share with our listeners?
I think you have to try lots of different things. And your path will reveal itself to you as long as you are open to trying lots of different things. I would just say stay curious, I guess, and really pay attention to what other people are doing, other artists. That's really important, because that's what you bounce off. Like, you're constantly putting ideas into a big melting pot of your subconscious, and then that's what further down the line will make interesting stuff pop out, because it's all been sitting there brewing over time. And yes, it'll be a sort of a weird concoction of different influences you've picked up along the way, but you have to keep putting things into that pot, keep tossing stuff in, stay curious, watch, listen, read, soak things up. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlie, for sharing your story with us today. It was amazing. Really, really amazing to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So fantastic. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode.
We'd really appreciate it if you would take the time to subscribe to our podcast and review the episode so that more people can find us in the future. Your comments help us pop up on people's suggested podcasts, helping our artist stories reach a wider audience.
Podcasts are best shared by word of mouth, so if you know people who might enjoy this episode or the Artwork podcast as a whole, we would love it if you told them all about it or tagged us in your social media posts and stories. And if you'd like to financially support this project, you can contribute on Patreon, where you can choose the amount you'd like to give us for lots of fun rewards.
And if you'd like to be a part of the Artwork conversation, we would love to invite you to join our Artwork Community Facebook group, where you can connect with the artists we've featured on the podcast and share your art with a like-minded community. You can find the link in the show notes, as well as all the links to today's artist.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at art.workconversation.
And stay tuned for our next inspiring episode.
Bye!
Bye!